Okay, so this tutorial is part 2 of the reverse foot roll. So the first one was titled Class 5 Reverse Foot Roll Joints, and I broke this up into 2 parts. So in this lesson, I'll show how we can create a set-driven key system to drive these joints rotating from the heel to the ball to the toe. So the first thing I probably want to do here is create some kind of controller that I can add the custom attribute to. So I'm going to tap the space bar to go into all 4 viewports and come to the perspective view here. And there's my reverse foot roll. And I'm going to just use from the create menu a NURBS circle. That's what I'll use to create my controller. Something that's easy to grab when there's actually character geometry in here. So there's my NURBS curve, and I'm going to right click on it to bring up the marking menu and choose control vertex. And then I'm going to just move these different control vertices around. Whoops. It might be easier to come up here and choose the select by component level so that Maya doesn't try to click away from what or deselect what I'm using and move on to a different object. So I'll switch right there. All right, so now I'm going to grab that control point right there and bring it out to the toe and just start reshaping this to look a little more like maybe like a footprint on the ground. So let's see. Let's bring these in here. This is probably the worst looking foot shape I have ever done. But you get the idea. So let's go with that now for time purposes. So that's my controller. Now, of course, I want to make sure that that's zeroed out, which it is, but if it wasn't, I could come up here to the modify menu and do freeze transforms, freeze transformations. We always want our controllers to be zeroed out wherever we place them, because typically when we're animating a character, if we want to get our character back to its neutral pose or its T-pose, we zero out all the controllers. So if their locations, if I move this somewhere else to place it, let's say on the other foot, it doesn't have a 0 here. So if I zeroed it out, it would jump back to a different location. So that's why we zero these out. And now I'm going to parent the reverse foot roll system onto this controller. Now, because this reverse foot roll system here is not in any kind of hierarchy, I really have 2 options for how to constrain the reverse foot roll to the controller, the foot controller. I could do what I call a physical constraint, which is middle mouse dragging this system right onto the NURBS circle, which again, I should probably rename that something like foot controller. And now it is, that whole joint system is contained inside the NURBS circle. Oops, it looks like I got something did not work quite right there. Let me take that system and put it in there again. There we go. Somehow I screwed up my joint hierarchy. So now if I middle mouse drag that into the NURBS circle, now when I grab the NURBS circle and move it, the joint system follows. The other way I could do it is I could select the controller and then shift select the heel joint in the reverse foot roll and then apply a parent constraint. That would work too. So now I'm ready to create my custom attribute that's going to be my foot roll driver, and then I'm going to use that to design set-driven keys so that I can roll from the heel to the ball to the toe of the foot. So with the controller selected, I'm going to come up to the modify menu and choose add attribute. And I need to give the attribute a name. I'll call it the foot roll. I need to determine what type of value it's going to be. I'm going to keep it at float, which is the default. That means it can use decimal points instead of whole numbers. And then I have to give it a minimum and maximum. And with this attribute that we're creating, we want to think of it sort of as a timeline. As I scrub back and forth in this value, it's going to animate the foot. It's not actually creating an animation. It's not time dependent, but we can sort of think of it like a timeline. So how much space do we want to have to drag back and forth to rotate from the ball or from the ankle, no, sorry, from the heel to the ball to the toe? So I'll do a minimum of -10 and a maximum of 10. So then that way when I go into the negative values, I'll be up on the toe, let's say, and the positive values will be back on the heel. So this is just my range. And then I can say okay. And now we see that that has been added over here to the channel box. Now I'm ready to set up the set-driven key. So this is the more complicated part. So I need to come up to I have to actually go to the animation menu because it's considered an animation even though it's not time dependent, but we are setting keys. It's a special kind of key. So I go into the animation menu set, and then I'm going to go to key and choose set. Where is it? Oh, I'm right on it. Set driven key set. That's the option there. And it should open up my set driven key menu, which it doesn't seem to have done. What's going on here? Again, key, set driven key, set, and it's not showing up. Let me pause my video for a second and see what might be happening here with Maya. Okay, I'm back. I think actually I just made a really blatant error. When I went to the key menu, set driven key, I was just clicking on set instead of the options. I think that's what I did. So I'll see it again when I review the video. But in any case, we have to open up the options so we get the box. And that should bring up this box here. So what we need to do is we need to load what's going to be the driver. Now the driver is going to be my control object, which is, it's now in the driven section. So I need to reverse this. So I'll select my controller and then I'll hit load driver. And then the attribute that's going to be the driver is the foot roll. So that's what I select here. Now under driven, I'm going to be driving the reverse foot roll joints. I'm actually going to be driving the ankle, or I'm sorry, that's the heel, the ball, and the toe, all three of these. So I held down my shift key and selected all three of these. And then I'll hit load driver here in the set driven key window. Oops, oh, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. I didn't want to load the driver, I wanted to load those into driven. See, it's a little confusing. So sorry, go load driven. Those joints come into here. Now I need to reload my driver because I put the joints in there by mistake. So my driver is the control object, and that will be, make sure I do this right, load driver. Now we got it. So my NURB circle's foot roll custom attribute will drive the rotate Z of all three of these joints. That's this axis that rotates them forward and backwards. That's rotate Z. It might be different on yours. It depends on how you have your joints oriented. So now what I can do is I can start setting my keys. So again, this is kind of like a type of animation, but it's not time dependent. It's attribute dependent, the custom attribute in particular. So I'm going to come back to my controller, and in the channel box, I can see my foot roll is set to 0. So when the value is 0, I want all the joints to be exactly where they are. So in this case, everything's ready to go. I can hit the key button to set a key on that. And you have to be really careful because we don't see keys down in the timeline, so we don't really have any visual cues. You just have to make sure that you go through each step properly. It does say result 1 here, so I know that it set a key. And now I can take my reverse foot roll and say, what should these joints look like when my foot roll has a value of 10? In that case, I want it to be back on the heel. So I'm going to select the heel joint, and I'm going to rotate it back onto the heel. Then I can come back over here to my set driven key and hit the key button. So I just told it, this is what I want the joints to look like when my controller's foot roll value or attribute is set to 10. And we can see that working now. If I go between 0 and 10, it rotates back onto the heel. So again, what I'm doing here is I'm just using the middle mouse button and I'm dragging in an empty area of the viewport. That's a way to sort of do an interactive slider for any particular value that you have selected. So now I need to do the opposite direction, which would be minus 10. So nothing happens when I go into the negative values because I didn't set any keys on that part of the custom attribute yet. So that's what I'll do now. So at minus 10, I'm going to want the toe to be all the way up in the air like this. Just like that. And then I can set a key, or set the key. So again, if I come back to my controller, to my custom attribute here, now if I go between positive 10 and negative 10, I get a nice foot roll. And we can even go one step farther and do some intermittent keys here to maybe hold the ball on the ground a little longer before it rolls up onto the toe. So I need to choose where I want that to happen in my custom foot roll attribute. So maybe minus 5. So right now it shows me where it is on minus 5, and I'll just have to edit this a little bit. So minus 5, I'm going to want the toe joint to be back down flat. So I'll set its rotate Z to 0 so it's flat. And then I'll take the ball joint and just rotate that up a little bit like this. And then set a key. So again, if I come back to the controller and I look at my foot roll, I go, there's positive 10, 0, there's down to minus 5, where it holds the toe on the ground, and then up onto the toe. So that's the basics of how we use set-driven keys to create the functionality of our foot roll system. So hopefully that will help us design our characters for our next project.